Okay, this is good. They talked us into this, and we're ready. Uh, this is really a program for Andrea Kime and Alexander Kozacek. They both spent the spring semester last year, just about this time, in Beijing partly, and then in Jingdezhen. We refer to Jingdezhen as the porcelain city. Very, very famous in the annals of ceramic art. It was in Jingdezhen that porcelain was invented in 960 AD, and it continues to be a rather amazing place to work. City full of porcelain. So what I plan to do just here briefly is give you just a short introduction to the program that we've established there in Beijing, in Jingdezhen, that allows our students to do some work there. And what you see on the screen is a group of students. They're Chinese students who form the basis of the student population in our program. You'll see Andrea Gill in there, and you'll see John Gill and Walter, myself. Back in the back, you'll see our friend Marlon Miller and Lee Summers, who taught there for several years. In 1991, the Chinese government organized its first conference on contemporary Chinese ceramic art and design. I was one of 6 authorities invited from the West to speak at this conference. I have traveled, lectured, and made work in China every year since that time. Friendships have strengthened and endured. Beginning in 1991, Alfred's Division of Ceramic Art became an important catalyst for the growth and development of contemporary Chinese ceramic art. Today, the Division of Ceramic Art runs a program in ceramic design for industry in collaboration with the Central Academy of Fine Arts, Bejing. CAFA, C-A-F-A, as it is commonly referred to, is the #1 art school in China. This program that we collaborate on developed out of conversations between CAFA President Pan Gongkai and myself, with the additional insight of Alfred University professor John Gill, who is the only person I know who can speak Chinese backwards. Our program became a reality in 2006. CAFA built a new state-of-the-art studio in Beijing, and we provided the concept, the curriculum outline, etc. Currently, we have an enrollment of approximately 40 students, taught by 3 faculty with the support of 2 technicians. All 3 faculty positions are held by Alfred Ceramic Art MFA graduates. Chun Mao Hong, MFA 2003, Boen Tong, MFA 2012, and Tom Schmidt, MFA 2009. The position Professor Schmidt holds rotates and must be filled by an American artist. Although fully collaborative with the Central Academy of Fine Arts, fundamentally, this program is an Alfred University, New York State College of Ceramics program. It's designed to educate Chinese students in China. It is not an exchange program as such, although it does have an exchange component, and we have had Chinese students from our program in Beijing working here on campus, and our students working there. Andrea Kime and Alexander Kozacek are 2 seniors studying ceramic art here at the School of Art and Design. This time last year, they were just arriving to spend a semester in our program at the Central Academy. I got an email just before I got here that our student Julia Berberling, who is a junior, just arrived in Beijing, and she will be working there and also in Jingdezhen in a similar way that Andrea and Alex did last spring. As part of their coursework, the students spent 2 months in the legendary porcelain city of Jingdezhen. Jingdezhen is located inland west of Shanghai in Jiangxi province, South China. In the year 1004, Jingdezhen was designated the imperial kill site of China and has remained so to the present day. Jingdezhen is the epicenter of ceramics in China. Increasingly, for the international ceramic art community, all roads lead to Jingdezhen. Andrea and Alex in the Porcelain City is the title of today's forum. It is my great pleasure to introduce them to you. Would you guys stand up? This is Andrea. This is Alex. They are very gifted and especially courageous students who are here to share their Chinese experience. Andrea's agreed to talk first, so come on up.
So like Wayne said, I'm Andrea Kime. I went to... ooh, these are Wayne's pictures. All right. These are Wayne's pictures. Yeah. Okay. So now these are mine. So I went to China with an open mind, not knowing what I was going to find. Well, maybe except for knowing that I was going to be able to have molds made for me. So I left on Valentine's Day last year. The plane ride was really long, and the food, per usual, was terrible. My last American meal was rice mush with fish. Anyway, I finally got to Beijing, and I met the people who I was going to spend most of my time with. Tom, one of the professors, Jeff, his good friend, Jertong, an informational design major, and of course Alex. So we all get in a cab and head towards CAFA, and I'm bombarded with a whirlwind of information about China from Jeff and Alex. Or not, from Jeff and Tom. And all the out of the windows is moving lights and tall buildings, and with the jet lag, it was super disorienting. So we finally get to CAFA, and I get to drop off all my stuff in my white-walled, metal bunk-bedded room on the 3rd floor that you have to take a circuitous route to, and you have to go up to the 4th floor before going back down, and then we leave for dinner. So we end up going to a Chinese place in the nearby Europe Plaza. So, and it's a small, like, strip mall and mall complex in the international area, and it became a main escape later on in the semester. So Tom and the studio technicians ordered a bunch of different dishes, and of course one of them was fish. And of course the chopsticks come out, and I'm pretty good with chopsticks. I'd been going to Nana's a bunch the semester before. But fish is really tricky because the bones are still in it, so you have to like pick out all the bones and then like stick it in your mouth and like try to take the bones out in your mouth and then put them onto your plate, because the plate isn't where you put your food. You put your food on your rice, and I didn't know any of this, so I was like, stepped back and like watched everyone else while they were eating and spit my fish bones into my napkin. The next week was a strange mixture of having absolutely nothing to do, interspersed with leaving the school to go sightseeing and getting to know the surrounding area, and buying things that I needed. A week or so later, I started, and the class started, and I met my classmates, all 14 of them. Unfortunately, they were pretty shy, and their English wasn't much better than my Chinese. Chen Mao told us that we would only meet once a week, and that the only project we would have would be to be redesigning a classic. It was a good thing that the first part of the project was that we were to be split into groups, and that we were to research porcelain, jade, and bronze traditional Chinese art. And so we did that, and then we presented, and of course all the presentations were in Chinese, so I really got a good education in the images. So little did I know that this was a really, really important project, and that our Chinese classmates would have a radically different idea of redesigning a classic than Alex and myself. In China, objects have a huge historical and cultural background, so much so that objects tend to stay the same for hundreds of years. For instance, the bowl. In China, there is primarily one type of bowl. It may be decorated differently or sized up and down. It may be used for serving or eating food or drinking tea, but it is still the same bowl. It is more than an archetype. It is the bowl. It has a small, straight foot and rounded walls that usually flare slightly at the rim. In the West, we have hundreds of types of bowls that have a tendency to look very different. We have soup bowls, ice cream bowls, cereal bowls, fruit bowls, and the list goes on and on. Also, CAFA is based more on a design school, so some of the fundamental principles and ideas are a little bit different. Redesigning was not just keeping the essence or a part of the original. It was redesigning for those students meant just editing the old, not creating a whole new product. So when Alex and I presented our proposed projects, they were radically different than our Chinese classmates. Both of our designs had changed our source objects into something completely new. I had drawn teapots that were a hybrid of both Chinese and English designs, which had a focus on blue and white surfacing. Alex had totally redesigned a teapot by combining it with a classic Chinese ewer with a geometric or Danish edge. Most of our classmates had made only small changes to a classic form or design or used them in a little bit of a different manner. Our ingrained cultural thinking and designing patterns were obvious. We were making products for totally different markets. Our classmates were making things that other Chinese people would feel comfortable with, things that intrinsically made sense to them. And Alex and I were making these fantastic hybrid monstrosities that people in the States, or at least back in Alfred, would love. They were new and different. So our critiques were totally different. Chunmao gave Alex and I crits like any of the Alfred professors would, but to the Chinese students, he gave crits like a Chinese professor, which means the professor is more like a guru and that the students are here to learn to be just like him, so that his opinions are the end-all and the be-all. After our ideas were refined, we made our preparations to go to Jingdezhen. We ended up taking a sleeper train, and I just happened to end up in a cabin with none of my classmates, so I had no clue what was going on the entire time. I almost didn't make it off the train because I didn't know it was time to leave. When we finally arrived in Jingdezhen, the famous porcelain capital of China, things started to happen. We were brought around to many of the small family-run workshops that produce small runs of cast or thrown work for other people. We toured a couple ceramics museums and markets and settled into our rooms. Jingdezhen was an entirely different place than Beijing. It was a small town where people liked to wear quilted pajamas and high heels and make almost everything out of porcelain, from the lampposts to the tiles on the buildings to the actual wares being sold. We had free reign of the city to create our projects, and it was daunting for me. I didn't know the language. I was sick the day the class went to most of the workshops, and I didn't know where to start. I was freaking out. I ended up getting some help from a former Pottery Workshop staff member who had helped Alex set up his project. She took me and my design around to the workshops that usually work with foreigners, and since my design was so complicated, a couple of them immediately turned me down because they didn't have enough time. I eventually settled on one, and a week later my models were done. It was crazy to see my drawings come alive. I had made a design for a model that I know I would never have the time, patience, or experience to make, and it came out exactly how I imagined. So then I got it casted and biffed, and the problem of how to get the blue and white on the teapot arose. There wasn't any pre-made decals that were right for what I wanted for my teapot, and so through the connections at the Pottery Workshop, they found someone who was like a brother of the sister of some friend who was a traditional blue and white painter who was able to do that for me. And luckily, none of the blue and white burned out, and it came out amazing. Since this process didn't take that much time out of a week, there was a lot of extra time, so I rented a spot in the education center of the Pottery Workshop and proceeded to be inspired by the skills of the local craftsmen. Each person had a specific job in each workshop, and they were masters of that one thing. And so my skills were nowhere near a master's, so I practiced and practiced and practiced and practiced. And the clay in China is very different. It doesn't have very much body, so normally in China they throw things really thick or cast them really thick and then trim them down to the desired width. And even with doing that, I couldn't throw things more than like 5 inches high. So I decided to embrace that and make really small decorative objects. I made small teapots, cups, and clamshell boxes, which were inspired by the ones I saw at the antiques market. I carved and painted patterns into them inspired by the things I was seeing in the patterns based on my Swedish heritage. Even with all of that, I still had a ton of free time, so I usually spent it hanging around the sculpture factory, which was where I was living. It's an area where most of the large Buddha statues are made, and from little ones all the way up to ones larger than life size. But most importantly, the sculpture factory has the Pottery Workshop, which I've mentioned before. It's a residency program in Jingdezhen where foreign artists and Chinese artists can come and stay and work in China and learn Chinese techniques. The majority of the staff is Chinese, but they all have really, really amazing English skills, and they are super knowledgeable of an area because they function as tour guides for about half the time for the groups that come through. Fortunately, Alex and I got to know them well enough that they asked us to do a lecture. Every Friday, the Pottery Workshop hosts a lecture. Usually it's one of their visiting artists or resident artists, but sometimes they don't have enough people to fill the spaces, so they ask others to do it. And we were lucky enough to be friends with the guy who was setting them up, Neri. Now, this was my first artist lecture, and it was a little bit nerve-wracking. From picking out the title, pattern, and form, to actually writing and putting images together, it was really stressful. Alex and I also had to have everything written out beforehand so that Neri, who is also acting as translator, could have enough time to translate it all for us. And then the day we were to present, Neri tells us that the local TV station heard about the lecture and that they wanted to do a story on us. So they came and filmed the lecture, and after it was done, they interviewed each of us. They then dropped a huge surprise on our lap, and they wanted to take us around Jingdezhen and get our reactions to things. It was really exciting because I really hadn't been out of the main central area where we were, which was the main ceramics part. So the first thing they did was to get us breakfast. We ended up in a dirty alleyway where a lady was cooking noodles, and apparently these ladies' noodles were Jingdezhen's specialty, and hers were the best in Jingdezhen. They were cold and slimy and spicy, and we were filmed eating them, and they asked, like, did we like them? We're like, is there something else to eat? We then ended up walking around the oldest part of Jingdezhen to see how ceramics affected the city in the past, and also to see more traditional building shapes. And then we happened across a secret government area where they restore all of the historic ceramics. At the time, they were piecing together broken shards from an underground kiln that they had dug up, and some scrolls. It was really interesting, but we couldn't take any pictures because every other sentence out of the guy's mouth was, you can't take pictures, you can't take pictures. But I did happen to find a picture of it in one of the museums we visited later, and here it is. Another one of the museums at another one of the museums, there was a shrine to the Kiln God. And this was the first time I had seen a Kiln God, so I was a little bit impressed. The story is that none of the dragon pots, which are the really, really, really big pots in China, and none of them were firing. None of them were surviving the firings. So the emperor was threatening to kill all of the workers if the next one didn't survive. So at the last moment, this man threw himself into the kiln, and miraculously that dragon pot survived. So he saved all the workers in Jingdezhen that day and was named the Kiln God. So at the end of our tour there, we had lunch. And so the table ended up being super full of all of these dishes, and we were filmed trying each one and yet again asked what we thought of all of them. These were a lot better than the noodles earlier. And it was really nice because we were being treated as we were someone higher up on the ladder than just a student. We were being treated as if we were special and important, and maybe as we were professionals in the field. We were being taken care of, and we didn't have to pay for a single thing during the day, and from the taxi to the entry fees to the museum to the 2 meals we were served. So not too long after this, I headed back to Bejing for my last 2 months. While I was there, I did a little more city exploring. I was now pro at taking the subway places, but the majority of the time I spent in the studio. I focused on making very Chinese forms in a very Chinese size, while also making them my own. I made traditional teapots and cups, which I glazed a celadon. I also placed them on bases which were reminiscent of some of the tea tables I had been seeing in Jingdezhen. I also made small eating or rice bowls that I pressed patterns into and textures into. They were glazed with flower glazes, which in the West we call crystalline glazes. And lastly, I did something totally from the West, plates. pretty much because I hadn't done them before and I wanted the experience. I used different colored slips to place layers that I carved through in different patterns that I based off of traditional Swedish folk painting. And then it was time to go home, but I had one more thing that I had to get done. My parents and younger brother had decided to come on a tour of China. So we started in Beijing to see all of the old government history and the Great Wall, and then we went to Xi'an to see the terracotta warriors, to Guilin to see the amazing scenery, and finally to Shanghai to see the city. It was a very different experience from the one that I had during the semester. Since it was by a tour company, we were taken care of and shepherded around from place to place, and the thing that astounded me the most was that we were always served American Chinese food. Like the stuff you can get anywhere here, like from Panda. And it was really shocking because there's some really fantastic traditional and common Chinese dishes that are completely suited to the Western palate. And I was really disappointed that my family wouldn't be able to experience that part of my trip. But overall, it was just really nice to be pampered, and I was ready to go home by then. So, all right. So, I'll start.
Hi. Can you guys hear me all right? Oh, snazzy. Stick. Okay, everyone. So the question I was most frequently asked when I was in China was, do you speak Chinese? And the answer is no, but I did take an intro to theater class, and I'll sort of go into that a little bit later. So back in the sophomore year when I first became aware of this program, I was intrigued more by the title than anything. It was Industrial Ceramics. I had a certain perception that I was going to have faceless drones making my work, and I was going to become the capitalist designer paying the way for this all to happen. And to be honest, this excited me. I felt like I would be adding a certain level of finish and markability to my work that I felt was lacking. But quickly, though, this perception of faceless drones would be shattered. So around this time last year, I was on my way to Bejing. I'm still getting excited thinking about this time in my life. Not so much the flight as I was seated next to the yoga section, which is near the emergency exit for those of you who don't know. It's like a 14-hour flight of yoga is a little much. Upon arriving in Bejing, I found out that my professor at the Central Academy of Fine Arts School of City Design would be Hun Chun Mao. And I distinctly remember during the first class, he was giving a long lecture in Chinese that sounded a little bit like a rant and sort of angry, but I think that was more just the language. He turned to me and Andrea and he said, "This is going to be totally different from anything you've done at Alfred before. You're going to learn how to work with someone else's hands." And I remember hearing this and making a pact with myself that I was not going to touch clay for the entire 4 months that I was in China. I was going to have everyone else do every step of the process for me. And next thing I knew, Andrea and I were in a soft sleeper class train headed to Jingdezhen, which was anything but soft as I needed a belay line to climb into my bed at night. So, after being shown around Jingdezhen for a day, I became rather anxious. I wanted to start working, but not knowing Chinese, a slight theater background, and a sketchbook as my Bible, I headed onto the streets of Jingdezhen to produce my work. So I walked into the first mold shop on the way out of my hostel. But I should really give you guys a bit more background before I jump into this whole process. So ceramics here at Alfred, there's facilities for every step of the process. There's a raw materials room, a glazing room, a casting room, a mold making room, and a kiln room. And all of this is sort of wrapped up into one area. Well, it's similar to this in China, but there's a factory for every step of the process. So you have to work with a factory. And I really shouldn't say factory. It's actually more, they prefer studio workshops. I feel like factory is sort of a derogatory term towards what they do. So I walked into the first mold shop on the way out of my hostel. And right away, one of the workers notices me holding my notebook, looking kind of like a Lao Wai, which is a foreigner. And he sort of beckons me in. He understands that I'm here for, molds. And so he sort of dusts off a stool, and I sit down. I start like thumbing through my notebook to show this guy, and he's told me to stop, and puts it away. And I sort of realize, I'm waiting for the master mold maker to show up. I'm waiting for the master to arrive. And eventually the master does. And we are sitting down together. He pulls up a dusty stool next to me, and we start flipping through my little notebook, and I'm sort of showing it. Like, yeah, this is what you want. And so he picks up the notebook, and he starts tracing it with his hand. He's doing this. I'm like, my God, this guy gets it. He's like totally there with me. We're making this happen. And then he grabs a lump of clay, and we're sitting there sticking PVC in clay, and we have this little model of my teapot made. And he gets up. And so I'm sitting there, and he like walks out of his studio, walks onto the street, and just starts shouting. And he starts yelling down the street. And I'm sitting there thinking, I'm starting to sweat now. I'm like, oh my God, I've offended this guy, or I'm getting arrested. I don't know if I have my passport on me. I might get deported. So eventually, after shouting for about 3 minutes, he comes back onto the street, or comes back into the shop. But he's not alone. He's being followed by a woman. And politely as she can in English, she tells me, he can't do this. This is too complicated. He doesn't have enough time. Go find someone else. And harnessing this theater background, I don't show any sign of being sad or upset by this rejection. Somehow, though, she felt the need to take me around the city and show me another mold shop. And this sort of begins the serendipitous travel through Jingdezhen for me. And I say this woman, but her name is Snow Yu, and she's one of the translators for the Pottery Workshop organization. And she sort of took me under her wing for the first day I was in Jingdezhen and sort of explained to me the subtleties of working in this city. And that's when we came to the plaster wheel. Now, I'd never worked with it here. It was always this object that sort of occupied the plaster room, and no one really worked with it. It was kind of dirty and kind of scary looking. But she told me that this tool is actually the foundation of the mold-making process in Jingdezhen, that everything stems from this one object. So we happened across this shop. So it's a little dark, but you can see the boy in the white coat and back. She sort of turns to me outside the shop, and we sort of have this conference. She tells me, that's the kid. That's the one that you want working on your work. He's like the best. So, of course, we go in, and the master, who's sitting over here, looks over my drawing, and he agrees to make it for a fair price-ish. I shopped around a little bit. And so he agrees to that. So now I've sort of completed the first step of the process. I finally have my molds being made. But I ask her, I don't have a caster. I don't have someone to pour the clay into my molds now. So we have another conference outside the mold shop, sort of tells me, I got a guy. I think you're going to like his work. And, well, I'll get back to that, but I just want to sort of show the work that they do there. So this is the teapot in front. These are the models. This is the sort of drawings that I was supplying for them. It's actually a version of orthographic projections, which is breaking three-dimensional shape down into two-dimensional planes. And so you can sort of see I'm working on it now, and my drawing kind of crumpled in the background. But, so back to her sort of solving my casting problem. We sort of have this conference, and she tells me this guy, Dong Liu. And we go to his studio, so, we take a right near the burning pile of garbage, down the dirty alleyway, past the stray cats, and we end up at a garage door. And we sort of knock on this garage door, and Dong Liu answers. And he's arguably one of the best casters in Jingdezhen right now. He studied in Japan for 2 years to learn how to cast Buddha sculptures, which you can see in the background. And we struck up on a chord, which was sort of writing hastily in my notebook and signing off on this, that he would make one test piece, and if it worked, then I would sign a contract for more to be made from him. So in a week, I get this piece back, this finished, mold, and I have to take it to the public kilns. And the public kilns is sort of a new idea to me, the fact that you bring your work to this kiln site and you sort of just drop it off in the corner and hope no one steps on it. And I didn't quite understand how payment worked. So I was like, okay, yeah, I'll pay up front. So I give the kiln man 10 kwai, which is about $1.50. I figured that was a fair price for one teapot. And then I came back to pick it up the next morning, fired, and he asked for 5 kwai. So, I guess 20 kwai was a better price. So I hand him 5. And this sort of goes on, and the piece worked beautifully. And then I started to realize, in retrospect, he was starting to pull other people's work out of the kiln when I would show up and pay him up front, and he would put my stuff into the good spot in the kiln. I think I was actually bribing him. So I realized later on, about a month in, that I was actually bribing the kiln man to fire my work. But as time went on, I began to forge better and better relationships. In the case of Dong Liu, he started to teach me Chinese so I could understand what days of the week to come and pick up my work. And I was teaching him English primarily texting, but it's more similar when your mother starts texting and everything comes off in capitals and the only emotion is sort of set to anger. So I get text like, come to my studio with an exclamation point in all caps. And I'd rush over there to find Dong Liu with the work mid-process and his assistant a little buzzed after lunch from the Bejing, which is a rice line. And then with the Kiln Man, well, I eventually figured out how to not bribe him, which sort of like made the relationship much stronger. And even some sort of strange things happened. We even went dancing one night in the park. And so we sort of had this shuffle cha-cha-cha became our sort of weird greeting that we had when I'd come into the kiln room. So to continue this sort of Forrest Gump-esque journey through China, I started playing basketball with one of Snow's co-workers, Neri, which is the word for black in Italian. He sort of liked Italian design. And this is the man who ran the Pottery Workshop Friday night lecture series. And one night over drinks, he said, we need someone to fill in for this lecture next week. Do you guys want to do it? And so me and Andrew, we both jumped at the opportunity. We were, fairly excited to do this. It was very cool. We got our first artist lecture in China. We're big now. And so I remember walking with my, notes folded in hand, sort of like going down the street, and I get a phone call from Neri, and he calls me and he says, Alex, do you mind if CCTV comes and films this and interviews you afterwards? And I was like, yeah, that's cool, yeah, I'm a big deal, right? And so we get this call, and we agree to it. It's very cool. We get this lecture. I think about 200 people came to it. It was one of the better attended lectures there. You can sort of go to our poster. And so the lecture goes off, we get interviewed, and then we sort of get this really great opportunity. They say, we want to take you around Jingdezhen and film you and sort of give you the opportunity to see some of the historical sites. So we get our cool press pass. We don't have to pay for anything. We get into exclusive places. And then we end up in downtown Jingdezhen. And they show me, they're like, we want to show you a wall. And, I'm on camera, so I'm like, okay, let's go check out a wall. So we go down this wall, and we go down this back alleyway. And, they look really smug. I'm like, okay, I'll go look at the wall. They're like, look at the wall, look at it. And so I sort of like leaning close, and I'm like looking at this wall, and I'm like, yeah, it's okay. And I'm sort of like looking at it, I like sort of stop. And I realize that there's this red transitioning to black in this glassy surface. And then I sort of like step back, and I'm in shock, and I sort of look around me. And I turn to them, I go, oh my God, are these kiln bricks? And then she goes, yes, these are the Jin Dynasty wood kiln bricks that make up a section of Jingdezhen. This small part of downtown Jingdezhen is actually made out of the old wood kiln bricks. And at this point, I sort of stepped back, and I became aware of this sort of feeling of ceramics I'd never encountered before. This idea that it can affect people in this incredible way, that it can house people, and it can affect their lives and generations of lives. And so this sort of really stuck with me. And that's sort of what I took away from, this trip, was this power that ceramics had that I really wasn't aware of before I went on this trip. And so I'd sort of like to end the lecture there with that, and this idea that, ceramics can affect daily life in a much more profound way than, I was aware of. And I'd sort of like to thank my advisors, the Division of Ceramics, the Study Abroad Office, and the university for giving me and Andrea this opportunity to study abroad. And I'd like to also thank Emrys for letting us have this opportunity to speak before you guys, and just thank you for